I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Iris Freelander. And today we'd like to talk to you about why me, Lord? Almost all of us have asked that question before. And in our lives, we're faced with challenges, difficulties, and a variety of circumstances that come to visit all of us. And a lot of the circumstances are certainly painful and challenging. And it is a tendency sometimes to ask, why me, Lord? And in our counseling work and in our spiritual work at the church, a lot of people often raise that question, don't they? Why me?
Yes, and that's a normal reaction, but most of us can get through it immediately and realize that why not? And everything has to happen to everyone one time or another. I mean, we all lose people we love in death, and we each have to go in our own time. And certainly not everything is going to be beautiful and lovely for a whole life long. And another thing, what we consider beautiful and lovely at one point in our lives might seem to be quite a detriment at a different point in our lives. So we have to keep our balance in that way, knowing that whatever happens, happens in its own timing for a purpose, and we can turn that purpose for good. And God gave mankind free will. He gave us free will. So it's our choice to make decisions. And when something happens, life is we have a choice there of how we react to that. And as we go through life making choices, some of them are not good, and perhaps they are good, but they seem to be not. So everything is according to our own perception. So when we look at life in that way, we're more able to see it as a continuous unfoldment, as opposed to everything having to be just perfect in our eyes constantly.
Absolutely. It really goes to the heart of what we say so often in New Thought metaphysics, that we live in our minds and not in the world. And the way that we behave in thought, the way our thoughts behave and we behave in thought, creates how the circumstance and situation plays out in our life. And if we kind of shake our fist at the heavens and say, why me, Lord? And it's very easy to get into the negative aspect of the experiences of life. And it is absolutely true that we're all going to be visited by all kinds of financial problems and relationship problems and health problems and ultimately death of ourselves and those around us in the transition from this life into the next. And so we know, as from a spiritual standpoint, that death is not final, but it brings to us a challenge in the confrontation that we have with our mortality and with our fears. And so it really does have to do with the way that our minds operate and the choices that we make. And we always have a choice to make in every circumstance and situation, and the choice is how we're going to think about it, how we're going to respond to it, and what we're going to get from it. And one of the kind of trite things is, are we going to go through it, or are we going to grow through it, or are we not going to get through it? And some people never get through certain circumstances. They just live in the pain all the time, and they rehash it and keep coming back to it again and again. And that certainly is a way of shaking our fist and saying, why me, why me? But if we do choose to see beyond the appearance to the reality, then we know that, just as you said, there is good in every experience. Now, that's hard to do when we're looking through our tears. But the fact is that even when we look through our tears, there is great good. And so we have to challenge ourselves to see beyond the appearance and the appearance of what's happened to us or seems to be happening to us. And it's important to remember, too, that the thoughts create things, and the thoughts in mind create after their kind, and so, which is another saying that's used widely in the movement. And so as we think, those thoughts become creative. And so if our thoughts are negative, we're creating negativity, and we're building and building upon that negativity. If our thoughts are moving away from the problem and the circumstance into an area of clarity and moving beyond it, or as we sometimes teach, detaching and rising, which is a technique that is very useful from a mental and spiritual standpoint. If we can detach and rise from the circumstance, then our thought patterns begin to equalize, and we can move into a very positive environment. And that's not to say that we're going to applaud and be happy when we're standing at a graveside or beside a hospital bed or looking at an empty checkbook. But it does mean that when we're standing at the graveside or by the hospital bed or looking at that empty checkbook, that we have a choice to either attach to that circumstance and stay there, or we can see it for what it is, and that is a transient experience that has some lesson to bring us in life. And of course, our experiences do bring us lessons.
Yes, and we can look for the good part of what's happened there It's just like we've both seen people who have grieved, and they grieve so deeply and unmercifully to themselves, unmercifully. But yet we've seen other people who say, well, I'm glad my spouse didn't have to suffer. I'm just so grateful they didn't have to suffer. And so they are lifted on energy, wings of energy, just because of saying that and really meaning it. And it's a very altruistic thing to say, instead of saying, well, I'm sorry that I've lost my spouse and I'll not be with that person physically again. They are rejoicing for the spouse who has had the good fortune to not suffer a great deal. And that's just one example. We can look at any circumstance in our lives, and I'm sure you and I have both done that ourselves a great deal. We look at any circumstance in our life and see the good and praise it. And that's not an original saying on my part, but it's a very important saying, to see the good and praise it. And there's good in everything. There's good. It's just like we've heard people, as I just said, say they're glad their spouse doesn't have to suffer anymore, or didn't have to do any number of things, but they're free now and they're at peace. And we know that when people go over in that state of transition we call death, that they are in a better space. And our grief is totally selfish. And I've experienced that myself when a loved one died a long time ago. And I realized the following week when I was in retrospection in the mountains that my grief was based very selfishly. And if we can look at life in an objective way, it's hard when we're going through circumstances to be objective. But if we can, then we're so much farther ahead because we see truth. And truth is manifest to us, and then we're able to live that truth. And as we do, then we keep our equilibrium, and we're at peace with the world. And we can see people of all ages who live that way. And then we can see people of all ages who give up or who are in despair. And why me, Lord, is a great and painful cry. And that's sad because we know that God is good and life is a series of changes. And so as we know those things and live them, then we can rejoice at a certain aspect of everything that happens in life.
Right, and the point of beginning for this process is to acknowledge where we are.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a really important fact, and we know that from a psychological standpoint and from a spiritual standpoint. And a lot of times in New Thought and metaphysical philosophy, we'll talk about, oh, well, we don't name things, we don't say things. And in fact, the denial of things or the repression of things really creates more problems for us and for our experience. And so what we need to do is to acknowledge where we are, but then decide that that's not where we want to stay, and that's certainly not where God wants us to be. And so if we're depressed, what I've said say so often, if we're depressed, we're depressed. If we're hurt, we're hurt. If we're sad, we're sad. However we feel, whatever we feel is all right. And I think the wonderful thing about the 20th and the 21st century, now the 21st century, that's hard to get used to saying, but in the 21st century is that, and that has come out of the 60s and the 70s and the latter part of the last few decades, is that people are really open to feeling what they feel and expressing what they express in a reasonable fashion. And that's not to say that we need to do it with abandon. But the fact is that if we're depressed, if we're sick, if we're sad, we need to say that. We need to say that to ourselves, and we need to say to ourselves that this isn't the way I want to be. This isn't the way I want my life to be. I don't want to be in this place forever. Now what can I do to move beyond it? And that's part of the process. Is life is constant motion, and that motion has to do with, in many times, letting go of certain things and going on to new things. And one of the things that we teach so much in our counseling ministry and in the church is that as one thing leaves our life, it creates a space for something new. And it doesn't mean that it's something that will replace it that's exactly the same, but it does mean that as things go out of our lives and we release them and move on, then other things come in to take their place, and the good goes out and the good comes in. And so there's this constant inflow and outflow. And yet if we have this mentality of why me, God, it's constant negativity in and negativity out, negativity in and negativity out. And so we build in ourselves this depression or this loneliness or this fear or this sadness or this experience. And so we really do need to get on with life, don't we? And for many people it's very hard, and that's a very, sounds like a very cold thing, and we want to be cautious about and verbalizing that to people who are at a point of pain and suffering, but we do need to get on with life. We need to acknowledge where we are, accept where we are, know that this is what's happened, and now be ready to move on, and to be ready to put it back into our subconscious, into our heart, and into our store of memories, but to put it into our store of memories in such a fashion that it doesn't keep hurting us, and it doesn't keep coming back to create the same kind of negative experience.
Yes, and what one person can do, another can't. Last week I was counseling a lady who's in a lot of pain, and she's taking mentally, and she's taking antidepressants, and which I'm sure you agree that that's a bridge across the water. We're not supposed to stay with them for a very long time. But she has been taking antidepressants for a long time. And I said, well, just think of the worst thing that could. I said, you know what's helped me a great deal in my life at various times is I think of when I'm facing a problem, I think of the worst thing that can happen. And then I decide how I'm going to work that through. And I think Dr. Peale, Norman Vincent Peale, said that. Someone said it, a great thinker, and it's not original with me, but so I told her, try that and see. And she says, well, I wouldn't want to think of the worst thing that happened. I don't want to dwell on something so negative. And she had a point. She wasn't there. She wasn't to the place where she could think of the worst thing that happened. So she needs to be led gently into that. But when we get to the point that we can, then we see that, well, there's always an answer to everything, because we always can think abstractly, but we can't think directly when we're faced right with a problem. So if we can just do that, then it does help, because we think of the worst thing. What's the worst thing that can happen in this situation? And then decide how we would handle it. Because we're not there yet, we can be more objective. And so then we decide how we'll handle it and then go on. And I know that you've probably used that in your life, because I certainly have in mine, and it works.
And we do need to handle it and go on.
Yes.
We need to move. We need to move from where we are, especially when we're in painful and difficult places.
Yes, and when we say, why me, Lord, without looking for an answer, without truly looking, then we're being the victim. Where if we say, well, what now, Lord? And then we're the victor.
That's the key. Instead of saying, why me, Lord, say, what now, Lord? What now, Lord? What is it that I should do? And we'd like to pause at this point of the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature so that you can continue to study the ideas that we're sharing with you today.
We would like to offer you the opportunity to receive one of these free booklets to further your understanding of the New Thought message of confident living. Each month we will feature a different booklet, which will be mailed to you free and postage paid. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807.
One of the things that I say so often to people when they say, why me, or why has this happened, is, I don't know. And, the other is exactly what we said before, is why not? And of course, we can say why not, especially to people who are a little stronger or at a point of making decision. But we do need to know that those two responses are both very appropriate, because there's this idea that I think some of us have, that for religious people, it's that if we do the things that we need to do within our church or our faith tradition, then we'll find favor and grace with God and nothing bad will happen. If it's that we live on high moral ground, it is then that if we just do all of the right things and we're moral people and good people, then nothing bad will befall us. And so we have these little formulas that we have for success in life or for avoidance in life, and that's exactly what it is. We think if we behave in a certain way, that then we'll avoid these horrible experiences. Well, I have news for everybody. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that we all experience both negative and positive experiences in life. Admittedly, some of us seemingly have more negative experiences than positive experiences. Excuse me. But there are very good people and very spiritual people who have tremendous challenges, and yet they're able to deal with them. And so it doesn't have to do with the favor of God or being better or worse. And so often people will say to me, well, what did I do to bring this on? And of course, there are some things that we do to bring these things on, and we understand that, and we understand the law of cause and effect, and we understand the reality of mental dynamics, and we can indeed bring things on. And we know that through collective consciousness, we do create negative as well as positive things. But so often, it's a little bit like psychotherapy. There's a strong tendency in therapy to go back into the past and to try to use the past. And certainly that has a place, but I think we do a lot too much of that. And I think we ought to stay out of that, and we need to dabble in the past when it's appropriate. But what we need to do is deal with the present moment. And I think that's the case with metaphysics and with theology and with spirituality. Certainly there are reasons that we can, that teachers and spiritual leaders can tell us, this is why this has happened to you. And then we can formalize it. But in fact, what we need to do is forget about that and just accept the fact that this is what's happened, this is where I'm at, I don't want to be here anymore, and move on and stop analyzing things to death. And because that's a little bit of why me, Lord, and then deciding, well, this is why, Lord, God did this to me because I did that. Well, maybe, maybe not, but that exercise is useful only in certain limited instances, and we need to stop it. We just need to stop analyzing life, and we need to get on with it. And I think there's far too much analysis.
Yes, there is. And actually what we're doing is looking for excuses, I think, and when we look for an excuse, we're treading water, we're not getting anywhere. So as we just, as you said, go on with our lives and go on from that point and learn the lessons we need to learn, but also the laws of reincarnation tell us that the certain law of cause and effect, as you sow, so shall you reap. And so life is a series of going, leveling out and leveling out and leveling out. And another thing, the law of reincarnation tells us that we come in very often for a specific purpose, to help a specific person with some problem, with something. Just as here on Earth, we'll help a specific person with money, with funds, or food, or clothing, or shelter, or in various ways we help each other, and we help those less fortunate. Well, the same is true, the same laws are true from lifetime to lifetime. So some will come in, one individual will come in to help another person, and to me they have sacred contracts or agreements, pre-life agreements, and so then they work through those things as they go through a given lifetime. And as they do, if they're comfortable with what's happening, then they are fulfilling their destiny on the planet. And if they're not happy and comfortable with it, then they're not. Then they need to make other changes.
And in so many instances, these events are really out of our control.
Yes.
They really are. And yet we'd like to understand them. And our analytical mind and our inquisitive mind wants to know the whys. And really what we need to know is not the whys. We don't need to ask why something has happened. We need to ask exactly what we said a moment ago. What shall I do?
How to.
How to, exactly. How to get where I need to be. And that is a really important dynamic of this elimination of negativity and beginning to change our lives at the very core to positive experiences, so that we're able, in the midst of every challenge, to not question, but instead be open to the answer. And the real truth is that God and infinite intelligence is always prepared to give us the answer, is always prepared to direct and guide and illumine our pathway if we would just open ourselves to it. But so often we want to shake our fists and say, why? and of course, the old saying about that really is that when we ask the question why, we really aren't asking at all for answers. We really want to fight. We want an argument. And that's usually what that means, is I want to argue with God, I want to argue with the universe, I want to argue with circumstance, I want to argue with my spouse or my mate, I want to argue with my boss, I want to argue with my finances, and it's really laying down the line in the sand for a fight. And that sets us up for nothing but more downward cycles.
Yes, more grief. But if we just look at our situation and first accept, and then decide what we're going to do, and then do it. And that sounds very simplistic, But life is simplistic, isn't it?
Life is simple and it's effortless. And you know, that's hard for people to grasp. And I think we've been taught for so long that we can learn. And of course, we spend a lot of time learning and teaching, and that all has use and value. But the fact is that life is an effortless process. And if we just, what we, in New Thought, what we teach so often is if we align our mind with divine mind, if we can align, for the traditional church, what they're saying, this wonderful thing is, what would Jesus do, you know, which is a great guide too. So if you can align your thought process with divine mind, then the answers are given and the way is made clear, and you move effortlessly through life. And it doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter where you go. It doesn't matter what you face. You have confidence. You have faith. You're centered in the presence and the power of God. And maybe, and definitely, not maybe, but definitely, we're not where we want to be all the time, but we know that we can get where we want to be. And we also know that we can get through the hard times. We can get through the difficult times. And we can do that because of who we are. And we're all perfect and whole children of God. And that's important for us to remember too, that we're not talking about people that behave in a certain way or of our faith tradition or anything else. Everyone is a perfect and whole child of God. And so it is effortless and it is simple for all of us, but it's not always easy to accomplish.
Exactly, and we can't see it sometimes because of our own lack of vision, because we're so constrained with the problems of life. A young girl called me just this morning whom I've counseled, and she said, "Now, I don't plan to take a lot of your time, but I just want to tell you that I need some help." And she was trying to find out certain things for help. So she said, about 6 different things or more that were wrong with her work, and she wasn't being vindictive toward her boss. In fact, she said, "My boss seems to single me out to be especially nice to me, but things just don't seem right. It just doesn't seem." This morning I called in sick. She said, "I called in sick because I couldn't face that job today." And so, and although no one's persecuting her there, so she said, she didn't know quite, and I said, "Well, it sounds as if you probably need to find another job." And she said, "It's just that simple, is it?" And you know, it really took me by surprise because, when she said that, because it was just that simple, because she gave a lot of different reasons, at least 10 reasons overall, why she shouldn't stay on with that job, because these unfortunate things have been occurring that make her feel uncomfortable. And she felt so uncomfortable about the work. And it wasn't any one thing, and it wasn't any person persecuting her. It was just her overall inner feeling. And I've taught her the technique of meditation, and she's meditated, and she said that. She said, "I'm grateful you've done that for me," because she had never meditated until she came to me for counseling. But isn't that interesting that sometimes we just have to be get to hear it said by someone else.
We do. And then when it's said, if we take it at its face value, then it is simple. It is as simple as that. And in her case, she probably does need a new job. And yet, for most people, they don't want to leave that job. They would rather be unhappy in the job and want to change their boss and change the company and change their coworkers and change the traffic and change the stress and change everything. But we're willing to expect change for everything and everybody around us, but not to change ourselves. And sometimes what we need to do is change. And sometimes it means a new job. Sometimes it means a new location. Sometimes it means the end of a relationship. Sometimes it means a new circle of friends. And the important thing that we need to point out is that we ought never to use this as a cop-out to be running away from things. We need to face things. We need to face the conflicts that we have at all of those levels. But when we face the conflicts, when we've lived in it and we're not happy there and we're not able to resolve it within ourselves, forget about resolving the other person. That's their business. Then if you can't resolve it within yourself, then it's time to make a change. And there's nothing at all wrong with making a change. And I think we have a real societal problem with that, and it has to do with commitment. And that is, we've trained ourselves that when we make these commitments, that they're lifelong commitments, and we do indeed make lifelong commitments, but there's good reason for lifelong commitments to be modified. And I think of the story of again, Charles Fillmore, the founder of Unity, who had written a book, and he was speaking to a group of young people about the teaching and interpretation of something that he'd written, and one of the students said, well, what you're saying is totally contradictory to what you wrote 10 years ago. How do you explain that? And he said, well, young man, it's very simple. I've changed my mind. And the fact is, we need to do that, and we need to understand that sometimes that happens in relationships and happens in work and happens in circles of friends, and sometimes it's just time to go. Sometimes it's time to redirect ourselves. And that's not a running away. It's a dealing with the fact, and instead of saying, why me, why me, why me, and going through this in a very negative way and in a very hurtful way, blessing it and releasing it. And of course, that's what, when we lose someone in death, that's what we do. We bless them and release them.
That's right.
And we're called to bless them and release them. And it is not for us to stand at the grave for 10 years and to weep and wail. It is for us to have the remembrance of the good times, of the wonderful experience, but to bless them and release them. And of course, we can bless and release friends that we need to move away from. We can bless and release children that we can't control anymore. And we can bless and release all kinds of circumstances and situations, but that requires us to take the initiative and the belief that if we bless and release this circumstance, that something else is going to come into my life to take its place. And therein lies the problem, because so many times we don't think that's going to happen. And we don't think so because we think we're not worthy or we're not able. The lady with the job, and many times I've told people, quit your job. Quit your job. And you know, I don't give advice very often, but quit your job. And so often people say, well, I can't quit my job because how will I feed my children? How will I pay my rent? How will I get by? Well, you'll do that by getting another job. It's very simple. But in their mind, they think, well, if I quit my job, I can't get another job. And that goes to the very core of how they think about themselves, because they're thinking, I can't get a job because I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, and all of these things. And it goes to the heart of the issue of self-esteem and value. And so we do need to change and reassess our way of thinking and our way of feeling about ourselves. And sometimes we just need to quit.
Yes, and the description you just gave of a person in their life, well, that's the kind of person who hates getting older, and they agonize over getting older, which is such a natural process.
Right.
I mean, we're all either going to die or get older, and so it's such a natural process that if we accept that, then we age more gracefully, and we age in a more attractive way. And it's just like I've mentioned before that I've seen two different women. I was with them at the time of their death, and they were women who were elderly and had been very ill, and yet other people who saw them after they had died said how beautiful they were, and how beautiful your aunt is. I never realized she's such a beautiful woman. Well, she went out so happily, and she had said to me, my aunt, I don't want to die, but I've outgrown this old body of mine. I'm 80 years old. I've had surgeries. I have other problems now, and I'm ready to go. And when she went so happily and peacefully that the mortician who came to collect her body commented, and he had known her all his life, a younger man. And so then the other lady with the same thing happened. The nurse remarked how beautiful she was. So that energy affects us all lifelong. And when we accept what is gracefully and happily and just total acceptance, then as we go through life, then we age more gracefully and we look better, more attractive as we go through life before we're older. So we really are either our own best friend or our own worst enemy, and how we think is reflected on our faces.
Absolutely, and we need to be ready and willing to release and let go of circumstances and situations from beginning to end. And we hope that the information we shared with you has been useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
And Iris would like to extend a cordial invitation for you to join them this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. for our weekly celebration service at the beautiful Seaport Marina Hotel at the corner of Pacific Coast Highway and 2nd Street, adjacent to the Marina Pacifica and Marketplace shopping centers. There will be a guided meditation, prayers, spirited music, and a dynamic, life-changing New Thought message. Please join us this Sunday. You will be warmly welcomed into the company of like-minded, positive, and uplifting people. And remember, whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can attain it through confident living.